Yesterday, I published a video titled, If Republicans Said the Quiet Parts Loud About Veterans, and I wrote that video last week. I shot it on Saturday. I edited it on Saturday and a little bit into Sunday, and I published it yesterday, which was Wednesday. And in that video, there's a line, a joke, where I, in my character as the sort of embodiment of the Republican Party, say that the Republicans guy, by which I meant Donald Trump, could go to Arlington Cemetery and pull down his pants and pull down his diaper, threw a little extra dig in there, and take a shit in Arlington Cemetery, and he could and he still wouldn't lose support. Like that wouldn't be the end of it. And then Donald Trump is in Arlington National Cemetery, and he does not literally take a shit on the graves of American war dead that are buried there, but symbolically he does. These people are really hard to satirize. It's really hard to imagine a point that they won't go to or a point that they haven't gone to yet, and then to go there through comedy, through fiction, in order to illustrate how awful they actually are in real life. It's really difficult to do that with people who seem to have no limit to how truly awful they are capable of being, or how truly awful they are at any given moment. Trump was there at Arlington as part of a wreath-laying ceremony at the tomb of the unknown soldier. And then he went into a more private section of the cemetery with some families of soldiers who were killed 3 years ago in Afghanistan. And it was a ceremony to mark the 3-year anniversary of their deaths. And Trump had been invited by some of the families, so it's not like he stormed in on his own. He was invited by some of the families. But the section of the cemetery where this private gathering was being held is called Section 60, and it is reserved for soldiers who were killed not decades ago in past wars, but have died in current wars or very, very recent wars. And because of that, and because there are family members who are coming to that section of the cemetery to pay respects and visit the remains of their children, their siblings, the rules for that part of the cemetery are a little stricter than for the rest of Arlington. And one of the rules is that there's no public photography allowed, no official photography allowed, no media, no press, and no political campaigning. And what happened was, and I'm sure most of you already know this story, so bear with me for summarizing it. What happened was Trump and his people were going into Section 60 with the family members, and Trump's campaign photographer was going in with them. A member of the staff at Arlington saw this, judged that this was against their regulations, that this was against their policy for what is allowed to happen in Section 60 of Arlington, and stepped in and tried to prevent the Trump photographer from going into that section. And the photographer or someone else from Trump's staff who was going in there with them shoved the Arlington staffer. The Arlington staffer at that point backed off and said, whatever, do whatever you want. This incident was reported, and Stephen Chung, who is a Trump campaign staffer, accused the Arlington staffer who attempted to enforce the rules on the Trump photographer and the Trump campaign staff, accused that Arlington National Cemetery staffer of having a mental health episode and of behaving just utterly egregiously and put all the blame on her and said that everything had been approved and the Trump campaign didn't do anything wrong and it was completely on the staffer and it was her fault for making this incident a thing, and everything on the Trump side of things was totally above board and totally fine. One of the rules of Arlington National Cemetery, and in particular of Section 60, the most private section of all in Arlington Cemetery, is it's not just a prohibition against official photography, and it's not just a prohibition against political campaigning while you're there. You're also not allowed by federal law to record anything that will be used in a political campaign. After Trump went to that gathering, that private gathering at Section 60, some photographs came out of Trump that seemed like some of them were taken by the family, and I imagine some of them were taken by the official photographer who was not supposed to be there, but was allowed to go in anyway because there was a physical assault on the staff member that tried to stop them. But there was a few photographs released of Trump posing behind the headstones of some of the fallen soldiers with their families, and Trump was throwing up his rictus grin, that mirthless smile that he has every time he smiles in any kind of picture that looks like he's never actually smiled because of genuine happiness in his life. He's just seen other people do this with their mouth and he's mimicking it, and throwing up the thumbs up, which again, like every time you think that this guy couldn't possibly be more insensitive and more disrespectful and more tacky than you've already seen him be, he somehow manages to top himself. So there he is posing for pictures and giving the thumbs up with his dumb grin, standing by the graves of relatively recent American war dead. But he releases that picture, he releases some video in the form of a TikTok video on his official campaign TikTok account. So it turns out he did record material that was used for political campaigning at Arlington National Cemetery, which you're not allowed to do. It's illegal. And honestly, it shouldn't even have to be illegal. People should just have sense enough and respect enough to not do that anyway. But the fact remains, it is also illegal to do that. The Army, which oversees Arlington, released a statement more or less backing up the initial reporting on this. One of the other things that Trump's campaign staff said was they accused NPR, which was the first news outlet to break the story. They accused NPR of basically fabricating it or of basing their story on an anonymous source, which in their mind made it automatically unreliable. And they basically said, this is all bullshit. This is all made up. None of this happened. The Army released an official statement earlier today as I'm recording this, basically backing up the initial NPR reporting, saying that, yeah, that's pretty much what happened. And the only reason why this isn't going any further is that the Arlington Cemetery staff member who was assaulted by the Trump campaign has decided not to press charges. So the Army considers it a closed matter. So it's not that Trump didn't do anything wrong, or that Trump's people didn't do anything wrong. They did. NPR first reported it yesterday. The Army, through an official statement, confirmed it today. They violated the rules. They broke the rules at Arlington National Cemetery for the purposes of a political campaign. And the only reason this isn't going any further than this is because the staffer who was physically assaulted by a member of the Trump campaign has chosen not to press charges. There's a famous line from Richard Nixon in the interview he did with David Frost a few years after Watergate, and Nixon resigned in disgrace as a result of Watergate. And there's a point in the interview where David Frost asks Richard Nixon, they're talking about the legality and illegality of presidential actions, and David Frost asks Nixon something like, well, is it possible in your mind for a president to do something that is illegal? And Nixon says, well, when the president does it, that means it's not illegal, by definition. And I feel like that's a principle that Trump has lived by his entire life, not applying it to the presidency, although with the presidential immunity issue, we know that he now also does apply it to the presidency, and he believes at least while he's the president that whatever he does is automatically legal because he's doing it. But I think he applies it to himself just as an individual. I believe his philosophy of life is no matter what he does, it's okay and should be allowed because he did it. Donald Trump sincerely and truly believes that the rules, whatever those might be, do not apply to him. The rules of law, the rules of common decency, public decorum, respect of the dead, respect of the setting, respect of the immediate environment, the immediate circumstances, whatever rules, official, unofficial, formal, informal, written down, or just known and assumed, whatever those rules might be, whatever form they take, they do not apply to Donald Trump. They apply to everyone else. They apply doubly so to Donald Trump's enemies, to Donald Trump's opponents, to anyone who's mean to Donald Trump, to anyone who's disrespectful to Donald Trump, to anyone who is insufficiently deferential to Donald Trump. The rules really apply to those people. But to Donald Trump himself, the rules don't apply. And he sees no reason why it should be any other way. And if you need an example of that, and you really shouldn't, because we've had more than enough examples. We've had examples of that on what feels like pretty much a daily basis for the last 10 years, as far as our politics in the United States goes, plus his entire life before that. But if you need another example of that, what better example could there be than yesterday at Arlington National Cemetery, our nation's most hallowed ground, where Donald Trump felt entitled to go there and have a member of his staff assault someone who works at Arlington Cemetery because they tried to enforce a rule. And then Trump himself and his staff went ahead and broke whatever other rules they saw fit to break with impunity. You're not supposed to conduct political campaigning. You're not supposed to use anything you record there for the purpose of political campaigning. Doesn't matter. Rules don't apply to Donald Trump. He did it anyway. Respect? What's that? Respect for the dead? What's that? Respect for American war dead? What's that? Sanctity? What's that? And I mean, at this point, it feels like, what is there left to say about this? Not just about this Arlington incident, but about this whole thing, about this whole unfortunate episode in our history that began in 2015 when Donald Trump announced he was running for president. What else is there to say about this? What more can he do to show who he is and to show why he should never have been allowed within a mile of the White House, within a mile of the office of the presidency, and he certainly shouldn't be allowed to go back there now? What else can he do to make that case that he hasn't already done? What else can he say that he hasn't already said a dozen times? And what else is there for people like me to say that we haven't already said? I'm going to keep talking about it, especially between now and November 5th, Election Day. I'm going to keep talking about it. I'm going to keep making videos about it. Anytime I feel like I have something to say, something to offer that is worth other people seeing and hearing, I'm going to keep doing that. I'm going to keep doing this. Because if we're not driving the conversation, if Democrats and progressives aren't driving the conversation, Republicans and conservatives are going to be driving it. So I'm going to be putting my shoulder into my little part of this. I'm going to be trying to drive whatever tiny, tiny part of this conversation I can influence and affect. I'm going to try to drive that in the right direction as much as I can. And I hope everybody else does as well. But in a more philosophical way, what else is there to say? There's nothing else to say. It's not to say, it's to do. And what we have to do is we have to beat this guy. We have to beat this guy. We have to defeat him in this election. On November 5th, we have to show up, we have to turn out, we have to vote, and we have to beat this guy. And we have to do more than just beat Donald Trump in another election. Because we beat him already, let's not forget. Joe Biden beat him in 2020. Soundly. Wasn't a landslide, but it was decisive. And here he is. He's still here. So we need to do more than just beat him in another election. We need to defeat him. We need to defeat the Republican Party in so resounding a fashion that it leaves no doubt about the kind of country that we want this to be and the kind of people that we want to lead this country. We need to do it. We need to reject Donald Trump and everyone who follows him, everything he represents, and everyone who represents what he represents. We have to reject them in order to push back the rise of fascism at least another 4 years. We have to reject Donald Trump and everything he stands for, because in rejecting him, we will also be electing to the office of the president an intelligent, capable, fierce, experienced woman. And we need to reject Donald Trump and everything he represents, because we need to exorcise this man from our national soul. We need to free ourselves of Donald Trump and everything he stands for, of this avatar of everything that America is and should not be, of this embarrassment to our national character, of this oafish, bigoted, incompetent, abusive, loutish, fascist symbol of everything wrong with this country, of every mistake we ever made and never owned up to. We need to beat this guy.